Subscribe to Kobe Tales and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's begin the story. At 65, I stood at the edge of my own driveway with 2 suitcases beside me and watched my eldest son hold out his hand for my keys. "Leave them, Mom," he said. Behind him, my daughter folded her arms beneath the doorway where I had measured her height every birthday until she turned 16. My younger son held a folder against his chest and refused to meet my eyes. 40 years of marriage lived inside that house. So did every Christmas, every scraped knee, and the last morning I spent with my husband. Yet my children were telling me I no longer belonged there. What they did not understand was why their father had spent 3 quiet afternoons with his attorney before he died. 2 days later, that attorney would open a sealed document none of us had seen. And before he finished reading it, one of my children would ask him to stop. Before I tell you what my husband had prepared, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because to understand why those keys mattered, you need to understand how they first came into my hands, 38 years earlier. I met Corbett Vance over a broken office copier in Richmond, Virginia. I was 27 and working payroll for a regional hospital network. Corbett was an electrical contractor who had arrived to repair a lighting panel after half our administrative floor lost power. He was not supposed to touch the copier. That did not stop him. "You know that isn't electrical," I told him as he crouched beside it. "Everything becomes electrical if you stare at it long enough." That may be the worst professional advice I've ever heard. He looked up, smiled, and held out a toner-blackened hand. "Corbett." "Lenora." I refused the hand. He laughed. 3 days later, he returned with coffee and claimed he needed to inspect the lights again. There was nothing wrong with the lights. Corbett was patient in ways I was not. He read instruction manuals before assembling furniture. He folded receipts into perfect rectangles. Whenever he faced a difficult decision, he tapped twice on whatever table stood in front of him and said, "Protect what matters first." It became irritating enough that I eventually loved hearing it. We married 2 years later with $87 left in our checking account after the honeymoon. Our first apartment sat above a laundromat. The bedroom windows rattled when the dryers downstairs hit their spin cycles. Corbett worked long days building his contracting business while I moved into hospital administration. We were not poor, but every dollar had an assignment. Then came our children. Dorian arrived first, serious even as a toddler. 5 years later came our daughter, Maëlle, who could negotiate bedtime like a union attorney. Our youngest, Keir, followed 3 years after her and spent most of childhood trying to make everybody laugh. By the time Keir was born, Corbett's company had 12 employees, and I had become operations manager for 2 outpatient centers. That was when we found the house on Wycliffe Terrace. It was not luxurious then. The shutters were faded. The backyard tilted badly toward a drainage ditch. The kitchen had yellow countertops, and one upstairs bathroom smelled permanently of peppermint because the previous owner had spilled a bottle of oil beneath the vanity. I loved it immediately. Corbett thought I had lost my mind. "The roof needs work, so fix it." "The wiring is older than I am." "You're an electrician." "The backyard floods." "You own boots." He stared at me, tapped twice on the kitchen counter, and smiled. We signed 6 weeks later. On closing day, rain followed us from the attorney's office to the house. Corbett stopped me beneath the porch before unlocking the door. He placed the brass key in my palm and folded my fingers around it. "This is yours too, Lenora. Never stand outside waiting for permission to come home." I kissed him and told him he was becoming sentimental. I kept that key for 35 years. Our children grew up in those rooms. Dorian cracked the hallway banister racing downstairs in socks. Maëlle practiced violin badly enough that our neighbor once asked whether an animal was trapped inside. Keir drew a spaceship behind the pantry door and blamed Dorian, apparently forgetting Dorian was 14 and could spell Jupiter. We never painted over it. The house improved as our lives did. Corbett's company expanded into commercial electrical systems and later energy infrastructure. I eventually left hospital administration to help manage the company's finances during a difficult expansion, then returned to healthcare consulting once the business stabilized. By our 50th birthdays, we were comfortable. Not private jet comfortable, not magazine profile comfortable. But the mortgage was gone, retirement was secure, and Corbett had invested steadily in municipal bonds, commercial property, and boring companies that paid dividends. He loved boring investments. "Excitement belongs at birthdays," he would say, "not in retirement accounts." The children benefited from that stability. We paid most of Dorian's university tuition. When his first consulting business failed, Corbett lent him enough to close it without bankruptcy. We watched Maelle's twins 3 afternoons, a week while she completed a graduate program. When Keir relocated for an engineering job and could not quite reach the down payment on a townhouse, we covered the difference. None of that felt like sacrifice at the time. They were our children, and they loved us. That is the part I refuse to rewrite simply because of what happened later. One summer, when I was 58, I returned from visiting my sister in Baltimore with a suitcase heavy enough to embarrass me. Dorian met me in the driveway. "Mom, what did you put in this thing, Bricks?" "Books." "That is somehow worse." He carried it upstairs while I followed, laughing. At the landing, he turned and said, "You know you can call me for anything, right?" I believed him. For years, I had every reason to. The changes were small enough to excuse. Dorian began talking about inheritance as if it were a financial category rather than an uncomfortable future. Maelle occasionally complained that Corbett was too conservative with money. Keir remained gentler, but even he once joked that Dad planned to take every dollar with him. Corbett did not laugh. That night after the children left, he washed 3 wine glasses and stared through the kitchen window. "They're counting things that aren't theirs yet," he said. "They were joking." "Maybe." He dried his hands. Then came the 2 taps against the counter. "Protect what matters first." I rolled my eyes and kissed his cheek. I wish I had asked what he meant. 2 years later, Corbett began forgetting ordinary things. First appointments, then names. Once the route to a supplier he had visited for 20 years. The diagnosis was vascular dementia, early but progressive. Corbett accepted it with the same practicality he brought to faulty wiring. He reorganized the company, sold his remaining operating interest to 2 longtime executives, updated passwords, labeled drawers, and met repeatedly with Everett Sloan, the estate attorney who had represented us for more than 20 years. I knew about the meetings. I did not attend them. When I asked whether I should, Corbett said, "Everett is cleaning up some loose ends." "What loose ends?" "The boring kind." Then he smiled and changed the subject. His decline took 18 months. There were terrible days, but there were beautiful ones too. He forgot where he had put his glasses while they were on his face. Then remembered every word of the song we danced to at our wedding. He sometimes called Keir by Dorian's name. He never forgot mine. One October evening, I found him sitting on the porch with an old wooden measuring tape his father had given him. He handed it to me. "Keep that somewhere safe. You've had this since before we met. That's why." Then he looked toward the front door. "No one gets to make you temporary here, Lenora." I thought illness had made him afraid for me. I squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded. "I know." Corbett died the following February, 6 weeks before our 36th anniversary. For the first month, my children became the people I remembered. Dorian slept in the guest room for 4 nights because he did not want me waking alone. Maelle filled my freezer with casseroles I barely touched. Keir handled calls from insurance companies and returned a pair of medical devices I could not bear to look at. On the morning after the funeral, all 3 sat with me at the kitchen table. Dorian took my hand. "You don't have to worry about anything right now." Maelle nodded. "We'll handle what we can." Keir looked exhausted. "Just grieve, Mom." I cried then, not because I felt weak, because I felt protected. Everett called twice during those first weeks. The first time I was sleeping. The second time, Maelle answered my phone while I was showering. She told me afterward that Everett wanted to schedule a formal estate meeting. "We have time," she said. "He said nothing is urgent." I accepted that. Grief makes ordinary paperwork feel insulting. The first strange question came from Dorian over breakfast 3 weeks later. "Do you know what Dad thought this place was worth?" I looked up from my tea. "The house?" "Yeah, just curious." "I'm not." He smiled. "Fair enough." A week later, Maelle sent me a listing for a luxury condominium near Short Pump. It had elevators, security, a gym, and absolutely no reason to be on my phone. "What is this?" I asked. "Just something I saw." "It's beautiful, Mom. I have a beautiful home." "I know. I was only thinking about maintenance. Keir approached differently. He offered to review property taxes, utilities, insurance, and landscaping costs. You shouldn't have to manage all this alone. I managed budgets larger than this house before you learned multiplication. He laughed. At least then, he still laughed. But the questions kept coming. How much had Corbett left in investments? Had I seen the updated trust documents? Was the house titled jointly, individually, or through the estate? I finally told Dorian that if he wanted financial information, he could wait for Everett's meeting. His expression changed. Only for a second, but I saw it. One Sunday afternoon, I walked into Corbett's study and found Maëlle opening drawers. She straightened immediately. I was looking for Dad's insurance file. Why? Dorian asked whether you found it. Then Dorian can ask me. She closed the drawer. Mom, nobody is trying to upset you. I didn't say you were. That evening, I called Everett. His assistant said he was out of town for a probate conference and would return. Thursday. I left a message. Before he could return it, I learned what my children had been discussing. Keir came by Tuesday carrying groceries. He was distracted and unusually quiet. While putting milk into the refrigerator, his phone rang. Dorian. Keir answered on speaker without thinking. I'm at Mom's. Dorian paused. Then he said, Fine, we'll talk later. About what? I asked. Keir reached for his phone. Too late. Dorian sighed through the speaker. The realtor, Keir. Thursday works, but we need photographs before we list. My kitchen seemed suddenly unfamiliar. I looked at Keir. He stopped moving. List what? Nobody answered. I set my coffee cup down. Keir. His face gave me the answer before his mouth did. The house, Mom. I stared at the son who once promised I could call him for anything. Then I looked toward the front door, where Corbett had placed a brass key in my hand 35 years earlier. My children had not been discussing whether I should sell my home. They had been discussing when they would sell it, and for the first time since Corbett died, grief stepped aside for something colder. The realization that my children had already made plans entirely without me. I looked at Keir until he lowered his eyes. Who decided my house was being listed? Mom, it isn't like that. That is not an answer. He removed the milk from his hand and set it on the counter. Dorian was still connected through the speaker, but neither son seemed eager to speak. Finally, Dorian said, We were going to sit down with you Thursday. After arranging a realtor? We're trying to get ahead of things. Things? The estate. I picked up Keir's phone and ended the call. Keir rubbed his forehead. Dorian thinks Dad's documents make the three of us beneficiaries of the property. Do you? I think we need Everett to explain everything. That answer frightened me more than a confident no would have. Keir opened his folder and showed me a photocopy of a document bearing Corbett's signature. It referenced the Wycliffe Terrace, property and something called the Vance Family Residual Trust beneath. It were the names Dorian Vance, Maëlle Vance Mercer, and Keir Vance, beneficiaries. My name appeared elsewhere, beside language I did not understand. Where did you get this? Dad's study. You searched his files? Dorian found it while helping with paperwork. I closed the folder. Nothing happens to this house until Everett sits at this table and explains every word. Keir nodded. I thought that settled it. It did not. Dorian arrived the next morning in a charcoal coat and the expression he used when negotiating business contracts. At 40, he had rebuilt his career after his failed consultancy and now advised logistics companies. He earned well, but I knew he had recently purchased a house beyond what Corbett considered sensible. Maëlle came 20 minutes later. Keir had apparently told them what happened. Dorian placed the same document on my dining table. We should discuss this without emotion. I almost smiled. You are discussing my home 3 weeks after I buried my husband. Emotion has already been invited. Maëlle sighed. Nobody wants to hurt you. Then stop planning around me. Dorian tapped the page. Dad transferred assets into trusts years ago. This document identifies us as beneficiaries. And what does it identify me as? He hesitated. An occupant with certain rights. Certain rights? We need clarification. Then why is a realtor coming Thursday? His jaw tightened. Because the market is strong. Keir stared at him. Dorian, stop! No, We keep pretending Mom can maintain a 5-bedroom property alone. I maintain 3 children and your father's payroll during a recession. That's not what I mean. I knew what he meant. Age had become evidence against me. Mel softened her voice. Mom, the short pump condo wasn't an insult. It has security. No stairs if you choose the right unit. You could travel without worrying about the yard. I don't want a condo. You might if you saw it. I saw it. Dorian leaned back. The house could sell for close to $2 million. There it was. Not safety, a number. Keir stood. I'm not doing this today. Dorian looked at him. You need the distribution as much as anyone. Keir's face hardened. I turned toward him. What distribution? He swallowed. His engineering firm had reduced staff 2 months earlier. He had survived the first cuts, then lost his position shortly before Corbett died. He had told his father, but not me. I didn't want to add something else. Are you in trouble? My severance covers a few months. And that makes selling my house necessary? No, Dorian answered for him. It makes settling the estate necessary. I stood and opened the front door. We're finished. Dorian remained seated. Mom, out! Maëlle gathered her purse. Keir moved immediately. Dorian collected the papers last. At the doorway, he said, You cannot avoid the legal reality because you dislike it. Neither can you invent one because you need money. His expression told me I had hit something. After they left, I locked the door. For the first time in 35 years, the click did not make me feel safe. Everett called that afternoon, but I missed him while speaking with Corbett's former accountant. His voicemail was unusually brief. Lenora, please call me before you sign. Transfer, surrender, or authorize anything involving the residence. There are provisions we need to discuss, I called back. His assistant said he had entered a mediation and would contact me that evening. He never did. Later, I learned he had been taken to the hospital after experiencing chest pain. It was not a heart attack, thankfully, but I did not know that then. Dorian knew only that our meeting had been postponed. He treated the delay as opportunity. Over the next 9 days, my children worked on me separately. Maëlle brought lunch and spoke about loneliness. Dad filled this place, Mom. Maybe staying here is making grief harder. Leaving would not bring him back. I know. She looked genuinely sad. That was what made her persuasion difficult to hate. Maëlle had always feared being alone. After her own marriage nearly collapsed 2 years earlier, she spent 6 weeks sleeping in our guest room while I watched her twins. Now she seemed to believe solitude itself was dangerous. Keir came to repair a leaking faucet that did not need him. He admitted he had stopped Dorian from contacting another realtor. I'm sorry. For which part? For letting him get this far? Do you believe the house belongs to you? He stared at the wrench in his hand. I believe Dad created something complicated, and I believe Dorian is reading only the pages that benefit him. Then why haven't you stopped him? Keir looked exhausted. Because part of me needs him to be right. That hurt, but at least it was true. Dorian stopped pretending. He emailed projected sale proceeds, estimated taxes, and proposed distributions. His mortgage payments had climbed after refinancing. His house to invest in a warehouse venture. That was now failing. He needed liquidity. He called it efficiency. I called it desperation. Then he found another document. It was a certificate showing title to Wycliffe. Terrace had been transferred years earlier from Corbett and me into a trust. Dorian came over holding it like a verdict. You see, I read my own name in the original, ownership section and the trust name beneath the transfer. I see paperwork. The house is not personally titled to you, or to you. We're beneficiaries. So am I, according to whatever you showed me last week. Your interest is different. How? He began explaining terms he clearly did not fully understand. I stopped him. Everett will explain it. Dorian's patience vanished. Everett worked for Dad. Dad is dead. I stood so quickly my chair scraped backward. And I am not. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Dorian looked away first. The following Friday, Maëlle asked all of us to meet at the house. A reset, she called it. I agreed because Keir promised there would be no realtor, and because some foolish part of me still believed a mother could bring her children to a table and remind them who they were. At 11, I heard vehicles outside. Not 1, 3. Dorian's SUV, Maëlle's sedan, and a white moving van. I opened the front door before anyone knocked. 2 movers stood beside the van. Behind them, Dorian walked toward me carrying cardboard boxes. "What is this?" "Mom, please stay calm. Get those men off my property." Mael hurried up the steps. "They're only helping with things you'll need temporarily." "Temporarily where?" She looked at Dorian. That was when I saw Keir near the garage. He looked sick. "Tell her," he said. Dorian set the boxes down. "We found a furnished rental for 6 weeks. It gives us time to prepare the house while the attorneys resolve the estate." "No."
Mom?
"No." I turned to Mael. "You arranged this?"
We thought if you saw the rental.
"You packed my things?" Nobody answered. I walked past them into the house. Boxes lined the hallway. My coats, shoes, books, bathroom items. Someone had entered my bedroom. Then I saw an open carton beside Corbett's study. Inside were his cufflinks, 2 sweaters, the wooden measuring tape he had placed in my hands on the porch, and our wedding photograph face down beneath a stack of files. I picked up the photograph. For a moment, the house disappeared around me. 36 years of marriage had been reduced to something somebody had packed before lunch. "Who touched his things?" Mael appeared behind me. "Mom, I did. I was trying to help." "You had no right." "I'm sorry." "You packed my husband." Her face crumpled. I placed the photograph against my chest. Dorian entered. "We can unpack sentimental items later." I turned. Something inside me became very still. "Get out." He held up a folder. "We have authority to secure trust property." "According to whom?" "The documents." "According to whom, Dorian?" He did not answer. I called Everett's office. Voicemail. Dorian said their attorney had reviewed the trust certificate and believed the beneficiaries could preserve the asset pending formal administration. It sounded official enough to frighten me. I should have refused to move. I know that now. But grief, legal language, 3 children, and a moving van can make certainty feel like arrogance. Keir finally came inside. "Mom, come with me." "Where?" "Anywhere you choose, not their rental." Dorian exhaled sharply. "This accomplishes nothing." Keir turned on him. "Neither does throwing her out." "You agreed the title was in trust." "I agreed we needed legal advice." Mael began crying quietly. I did not. I packed the measuring tape and wedding photograph into my handbag. Then I went upstairs and finished packing 1 suitcase myself. When I returned, Keir was carrying my larger suitcase toward the door. For one strange second, I saw him at 22, laughing as he carried my luggage upstairs after a family reunion. Now he carried it the other direction. Outside, Dorian placed the second suitcase beside the driveway. Mael stood near the doorway with her arms folded tightly, less from anger now than shame. Keir held the folder. Dorian pointed toward his SUV. "I'll drive you."
No.
I called my friend Inez Harrow, who lived 15 minutes away. She answered immediately. When I told her I needed somewhere to stay, she asked no questions. "I'm coming." Dorian held out his hand. "The keys, Mom." I looked at his palm. Rainy closing day. Corbett folding my fingers around a brass key. Never stand outside waiting for permission to come home. I removed the key ring slowly. "But I kept the original brass key." I handed Dorian the newer duplicate. His eyes narrowed. "1 is enough." Inez arrived 7 minutes later. I left without hugging any of them. That night, I sat in her guest room with Corbett's measuring tape across my knees. Inez had made tea, but it sat untouched beside me. Through the guest room window, I could see lights coming on in houses along her street. Families were arriving home, opening doors, carrying groceries inside. Such ordinary movements suddenly seemed like privileges. I wondered whether Dorian had changed my locks already, whether Mael had unpacked Corbett's photograph, whether Keir had finally challenged his brother after I left. At 8:43, my phone rang. Everett Sloan.
"Lenora, where are you?"
"At Inez's."
"Why?"
"My children removed me from the house." Silence. Then his voice sharpened. "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Did you authorize a sale?" "No." "Did you voluntarily surrender your right to occupy the residence?"
"I don't know what that means."
"Good." I sat straighter. "Everett, what is happening? Do you still have a house key?" I closed my hand around the old brass key. "Yes." "Keep it. Sign nothing." Give nobody another document. He paused. Tomorrow. 9 o'clock, my office. All 3 children.
Why?
Because they have read enough of Corbett's estate plan to become confident. Lenora. Another pause. But not enough to understand what they've just done. I arrived at Everett. Sloane's office at 8:52 with Corbett's. Brass key in my coat pocket and his wooden measuring tape in my handbag. Dorian was already there. He sat at the conference table beside an attorney I did not recognize. Maëlle occupied the chair nearest the window, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. Keir stood when I entered.
Mom.
I nodded but did not hug him. Everett came in carrying a thick binder and a sealed cream envelope. He looked tired after his hospital visit, but his voice was steady. Before we begin, I want one fact established. Mrs. Vance did not voluntarily leave. Wycliffe Terrace, correct? Dorian's attorney shifted. Dorian answered first. We relocated her temporarily while ownership was being clarified. You put her belongings outside. We believed the trust authorized us to protect the property. Everett tapped the table twice. My breath caught. Corbett had picked up that habit from him, or perhaps Everett from Corbett. After 30 years, I had never asked which. Then, Everett said, we should discuss what the trust actually authorizes. Dorian opened his folder. The certificate identifies us as remainder beneficiaries. It does. And the residence belongs to the trust. It does. Dorian glanced at me, almost apologetically triumphant. For several seconds, I wondered whether Everett had misunderstood my call. He continued. The residence was transferred to the Vance Family Residual Trust in 2019. Upon Corbett's death, his 3 children became remainder beneficiaries in equal shares. Maëlle whispered, That's what we said. Everett nodded. Yes, that portion you understood correctly. My fingers tightened around my handbag. Then Everett opened the binder. What you apparently did not read was Article 7. Dorian's attorney leaned forward. Everett slid copies across the table. Article 7 grants Lenora Vance an exclusive lifetime residential interest in Wycliffe Terrace. She possesses the unrestricted right to occupy the property for the remainder of her life. No remainder beneficiary may compel sale, partition the property, terminate her occupancy, change access, or require relocation without her written consent. Nobody moved. I read the paragraph twice. My name looked strange on the page. Dorian recovered first. But she doesn't own it. Everett looked directly at him. Neither do you. Dorian's mouth closed. The trust owns it, Everett continued. Your future beneficial interest does not create a present right of possession. Keir lowered his head. Maëlle stared at me. I asked the question that mattered. Can I go home? Yes. One word. After 2 days of feeling like luggage somebody had misplaced, one word returned the ground beneath my feet. Everett was not finished. Corbett also anticipated that the residence would require maintenance, taxes, insurance, and staffing as Lenora aged, a separate marital support. Trust holds income-producing assets designated for her benefit. Dorian frowned. What assets? Everett turned another page. 2 commercial properties, municipal bond holdings, marketable securities, and proceeds from the sale of Corbett's remaining business interest. How much? Dorian asked. Maëlle looked embarrassed. Everett did not. The current trust value is approximately $6.4 million. Lenora is the lifetime income beneficiary. The independent trustee may also distribute principal for her housing, health, travel, care, and general welfare. I stared at him. Corbett and I had discussed our finances, but not that structure. Why didn't he tell me? He intended to. His cognitive decline accelerated. He also knew you disliked discussing life after him. That was true. Every time Corbett tried, I found dishes to wash or appointments to remember. Everett continued. After Lenora's death, remaining assets passed to the 3 remainder beneficiaries, subject to the provisions governing beneficiary conduct. Dorian leaned forward. What provisions? Everett removed his glasses. This is where yesterday becomes relevant. His attorney finally spoke. Mr. Sloane, if you're referring to a forfeiture clause, Virginia courts construe such provisions narrowly. Correct. Which is why Corbett did not. Draft a theatrical clause saying a child loses. Everything for upsetting his mother. Despite myself, I nearly smiled. Everett turned toward us. he created a conditional distribution mechanism. Any beneficiary who knowingly attempts to coerce Lenora into relinquishing her residential interest, interferes with her access, or represents themselves as possessing authority they do not have may have discretionary distributions. Suspended pending. Review by the independent trustee. Dorian's face changed. Suspended for how long? That depends on conduct, remediation, and the trustee's determination. Your remainder interest is not automatically erased. So you're threatening my inheritance. Dorian's face changed. Suspended for how long? That depends on conduct, remediation, and the trustee's determination. Your remainder interest is not automatically erased. So you're threatening my inheritance. No, I am explaining the document your father signed. Keir spoke quietly. I told him we needed to wait. Dorian turned. You helped pack. Yes. The admission landed harder than an accusation. Keir looked at me. I did. I'm not pretending otherwise. Mael wiped beneath one eye. Everett raised a hand. There is another issue. The movers entered the residence under instructions from beneficiaries who lacked possession rights. Fortunately, Lenora has not authorized a transfer, and no sale agreement exists. The simplest immediate remedy is restoration of her access and possessions. I never changed the locks, Keir said. Dorian looked toward him. You told me you would. I said I'd call a locksmith. I didn't. For the first time that morning, I felt something besides shock. Keir had failed me. But somewhere between my driveway and the locksmith, he had stopped failing me further. Everett closed the binder. Then he touched the cream envelope. Corbett left this with me 11 months ago. His instructions were specific. I was to read it only if a serious dispute arose concerning Lenora's right to remain in the house. Mael covered her mouth. Dorian leaned back. Everett broke the seal. My children, he began, if Everett is reading this, then something I hoped would remain unnecessary has become necessary. Dorian looked away. I love you. That is not changed by money, documents, or disappointment. But love does not require blindness. Everett paused. Your mother built our life beside me before there was anything worth inheriting. She balanced bills when my company missed payroll. She returned to work when we needed insurance. She raised you in a house we could barely afford before it became an asset anyone would bother measuring. My eyes blurred. Whatever remains after we are both gone was meant to help you. It was never meant to make Lenora dependent on your permission. Mael began crying silently. Everett continued. If concern for your mother ever becomes an argument for removing her choices, stop and ask whether you are protecting her or protecting what you expect to receive. Then came the sentence that broke me. Lenora, if they ever leave you standing outside that door, remember the first key. I gave it to you because home was the life we made there, and no document I signed was meant to make you a guest in it. I pressed my hand against my mouth. For weeks I had wanted Corbett back so desperately that I dreamed of hearing him cough in the hallway. Now his voice seemed to exist inside a legal office through words he had written, while he still could. Everett finished. Protect what matters first. I hope you understand now that I meant people before property and character before inheritance. Love, Dad. No one spoke immediately. Dorian's attorney closed his notebook. Mael was first. I'm sorry, Mom. I looked at her. She shook her head. No explanation. I packed Dad's things. I knew you didn't want to leave, and I kept telling myself we were helping because admitting otherwise meant admitting what we were doing. Keir's voice came next. I needed money. I let that make Dorian's interpretation convenient. Dorian pushed his chair back. So I'm the villain now? No, I said. Everyone looked at me. You're my son. His expression softened slightly. And you put my suitcases outside. The softness disappeared. I thought legally, you wanted $2 million to solve a problem you created. The law was useful because you thought it agreed with you. His face reddened. You have no idea what I'm dealing with. You're right, because you never asked me for help. You simply decided my home was easier to liquidate. He stood. Everett's voice remained calm. Dorian, I strongly suggest you let your counsel review the complete trust before taking another action. Dorian picked up his coat. At the door, he looked at me as though waiting for me to rescue the moment. I had rescued him from failed ventures, overdue bills, and consequences before. I stayed seated. He left. That afternoon, Keir drove me home. The moving van was gone, but boxes remained throughout the hallway. Maëlle arrived 20 minutes later without being asked. She carried Corbett's belongings back into his study one box at a time. I stopped her before she unpacked them. "I'll do that." She nodded. "I understand." Keir placed my suitcase inside the bedroom. Neither of us mentioned the other time he had carried it. Before leaving, he handed me every duplicate key Dorian had collected. "I'm going to earn back being trusted with one," he said. "Maybe." It was the most honest answer I had. Dorian did not call for 3 months. The independent trustee suspended his access to discretionary advances while reviewing what happened. His eventual inheritance remained intact, but no trust money would rescue his warehouse investment. He sold his oversized house instead. Maëlle began visiting on Sundays, initially without the twins. She never pushed me to forgive her. She helped organize Corbett's papers when I asked and left when I needed quiet. Keir found another engineering position. 6 months later, I gave him a new duplicate key, not because he was my son, but because his behavior had slowly made the gesture feel safe again. Dorian eventually wrote me a letter. It contained no excuses. I answered it. We were not repaired, but we had begun speaking. I also changed. The hardest adjustment was learning that boundaries could disappoint people without making me cruel. Maëlle asked whether I would help pay for the twins' summer programs. I could have written the check without noticing the amount. Instead, I asked what she had budgeted and what the twins could contribute from weekend jobs. She looked surprised, then smiled. Dad would approve. Told her this was not about Dad. It was about me finally understanding that helping someone and carrying them were different things. For most of motherhood, I had confused the two. I would not do that anymore. For decades, being needed had felt so much like being loved that I rarely distinguished between them. I stopped paying adult children's emergencies automatically. I traveled to Charleston with Inez. I funded a scholarship through the hospital system where I had started my career. I converted Corbett's study only after a year, keeping one wall of his books and his wooden measuring tape on the shelf. And I stayed in my house. One autumn afternoon, nearly 2 years after the morning Everett read Corbett's letter, I stood at the front door while Maëlle's twins raced through the hallway toward the kitchen. Keir followed carrying dessert. Dorian remained on the porch. Our relationship was improving, but slowly. He looked at me. "May I come in?" Such a small question. Once, he had stood in that doorway and decided I was the person who needed permission. Now he waited for mine. I reached into my pocket and felt the worn edges of Corbett's original brass key. I thought about the young woman standing in the rain 35 years earlier, laughing at her sentimental husband. Then I stepped aside. "Yes." Dorian entered. Not because a trust required me to forgive him, not because inheritance had frightened him into behaving, because this time I chose to open the door. Corbett had protected my right to remain in that house. What I learned afterward was larger than property. A home is not truly yours because your name appears on paper, but because nobody inside it gets to decide that your dignity belongs outside the door.